According to YouTube's analytics, roughly 80% of people watching this video are under 35 years old. Marketers have invented a name for this demographic of impressionable young people. They're called millennials. Others have labelled them Generation Y. A millennial is anyone born after 1980. That includes myself and most of my viewers. In fact, millennials now outnumber every other generation. But according to multiple studies, we are the most depressed generation ever. Psychology Today reports that the suicide rate amongst young adults has tripled since the 1950s, and terrifyingly, suicide is now the second most common cause of death amongst college students. Between 2005 and 2014, the number of clinically depressed teenagers increased by more than 500,000, 3/4 of whom were women.
The idea that anybody seriously is interested in the Kardashians, I'm utterly mystified. I think the more that we have a disrespectful attitude towards our own egos, I think the happier life becomes. And I think the great problem of growing up at the moment, particularly for young people, is that you're told that if you're not rich and famous, your life is not really worthwhile. And that is such pernicious crap. You know?
So I think it's interesting that you find introspection and meditation so important, because you've made your name and career partly for performance. And so how do you think show business and performance fits into all of this?
Well, I think that you can be, somebody once said to me, you can be an introverted exhibitionist. And I think there's truth in that. But I think on the whole, very few people are purely extrovert or purely introvert. The American society is much more extroverted. And I don't think Americans are aware of that. But there's an absolutely fabulous book called Quiet. It's a completely white cover. It's written by a woman called Susan Cain, C-A-I-N. And it's called Quiet, and it's about being an introvert. And I read that 3 years ago, and it was very helpful to me, because in an extroverted society, you can start feeling that there's something a bit wrong with you if you're an introvert. I don't believe that at all. I think if you sat down with Jesus and the Buddha, you'd find that they were both introverts. And extroverted values, which are to do with fame and money and status and positions, these are all things you have no control over. Do you see what I mean? Whereas you have a certain amount of control over your inner life, because you can somehow, you can not control your thoughts, but you can decide how much energy to give to a specific thought. That was a bit profound.
That's, I think it...
I want people to know that, because you guys are in a very creative business, and you have to learn how to contact your unconscious and use it. And what I spend a lot of time doing is teaching people that you've got to be quiet. You can't have a creative idea where you're rushing around, answering your cell phone, looking at your watch, sending off email. It's not going to happen. You've got to get quieter. And Edison, who I think has more patents than any other American in history, he had an extraordinary way of working. He would sit and he would hold ball bearings in his hand, and he would have a metal plate down there, a metal bowl, because he thought he got his best ideas in that sort of hinterland between being awake and actually being asleep. And the reason he did that is that as he fell asleep, he would drop the ball bearings into the metal bowl, and they would wake him up again, and he'd pick it up and go. And he liked to stay in that very, very dreamy state, because that's when he got his most of his ideas. Right. You see, and that's how I feel about most of technology. I'm reading a lot of stuff at the moment about how is it affecting us all. I've certainly come to the conclusion that all this stuff about multitasking has been shown by research and it doesn't work. You get less done and it takes you longer, but people run around talking about the fact they can multitask. So I think we have to look. There's a great book. If you haven't read this book, please read it. Written by a New Yorker. He was a professor of communications, but he liked anonymity, so he'd never say where he was, but his name was Neil Postman, as in mailman. Neil Postman. It's called Technopoly. And I honestly suggest you run out and read it, because you'll be absolutely fascinated. Because it's about the skepticism that I feel about technology, because people always invent a bit of great technology and they see all the positive benefits, but because we're such flawed creatures, then everyone comes along as a second stage and there's a whole lot of negative benefits, or negative whatever, you see what I mean? And people never see that.
You love your iPhone, but you've had it for a while. Now you need something else to distract you from the gaping hole inside. Introducing a new thing from Apple. What does it do? We don't know. And honestly, do you care? Just rub your hands on it. See? You're happy. For now. But the darkness will find you once again. Which is why we're also introducing the new Apple Thing S. This fixes everything wrong with you, right? Right. But soon, even this joy will pass, just like everything else you love, leaving you empty, cold, and alone, with nothing and no one to hold on to. Until the Apple Thing 2, and 2S and 3S, and of course the Apple Thing Pro. You'll buy every single one of them, and then you'll be dead. And none of it will matter. Apple, the grave awaits us all.